Welcome to Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. I'm your host, Matthew Halderman, and each week we're going to dive into a different piece of content, film and television, and we're going to talk with some of the biggest names in front of and behind the camera as we dive deep into how they were financed, produced, developed, marketed, and the crazy stories behind how many of them got made. Welcome again to Greenlit. Today on the podcast, we have Vince Javolet. Vince is James Franco's business partner, and they founded their production company, Rabbit Bandini, together a number of years ago. Vince is really well-known, prolific, independent producer working on projects like Spring Breakers and The Disaster Artist. In this podcast, we'll spend the majority of the time talking through how he met James Franco, the building of their production company, and then working with partners like Seth Rogen. We've made a few projects here at Bondit Media Capital and Buffalo 8 with Vince over the years, specifically a project called King Cobra back in 2017 that we took to the Tribeca Film Festival. Vince, again, is a phenomenal storyteller. So without further ado, enjoy this podcast with Vince Javolet. Today I've got Vince Javolet joining us today. So Vince, first off, thanks for carving out the time and joining.
Definitely, no problem. Glad to do it.
Good to catch up.
Something to do.
That's right, something to do during this time of quarantine.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to, there's a bunch to talk with you about, and your story is so unique and super interesting. And I don't say that as a cliche. You've got a really unique path. But I want to frame it around The Disaster Artist and how The Disaster Artist got greenlit.
So I've been in LA for, I can't believe it, but over 20 years now, 23 years. And oddly, James was literally one of the first people I actually met in LA in my acting class. I moved out to LA to be an actor. And I realized quickly over the course of 6 years that maybe acting isn't the thing for me. Maybe there's something else in the entertainment industry that I could be doing. And at that time, James was taking off as an actor, and he came to me one day. He's like, look, I have this idea for a play that I want to do, and I'm thinking maybe you should put it together, and you can act in it, and we'll do this play. And so we did this play. I put it together, and it was sort of my first foray into producing, even though it was for theater. And then about 3 months later, he comes back, he says, why don't we adapt this play into a film, and you can produce that? I'm like, okay, that sounds great. I never produced any film whatsoever. So we did this little film called The Ape. It took place in one room, which was great because you didn't have to deal with big locations or anything. And he paid for it because he just made a ton of money on Spider-Man. And that sort of started everything. And from that point on, it was projects really that James wanted to do, that he wanted to get more into filmmaking, more into directing. He was doing very well in the acting world. He just wanted to transition into directing. At one point he asked, what should our production company name be? And, he's huge into literature, and I was reading a lot at the time, and I was reading a book called Rabbit Run by John Updike, and he was reading a book called Ask the Dust by John Fonte. And we just kind of sort of put these names together, and there's a character in Ask the Dust named Arturo Bandini. And so Rabbit, Bandini, and so that just sort of came together kind of naturally like that. So over the years, we did a lot of passion projects, and the high point, obviously, for me and all of us was The Disaster Artist. And that, to me, was when James was finally firing on all cylinders. Meaning he was taking his artistic background, he had a very extensive artistic background, and applying it to a commercial material, or I say more mainstream material.
Yep.
Over the years before Disaster Artist, it was just a lot of niche and passion projects that were just dense and hard to understand. But with The Disaster Artist, not only was it great material, it's a character that he relates to on a deep personal level, and it's another producer that we bring in that James listens to big time, Seth Rogen. Yep. And, those two have known each other for a long time. And Seth is one of the greatest producers ever. He's so smart. And so that whole combination brought Disaster Artist together and made it the success it was. Of course, it was very difficult getting there, especially when you're dealing with someone like Tommy Wiseau.
So go more into that, Vince. Yeah. I'm so curious, and I think you're dead right hitting on, up until that point, the work even we had done together at Bonded and Buffalo 8 with Rabbit Bandini had been a lot of niche content, and it felt like Disaster Artist was sort of walking both lines of being this sort of perfect piece of underdeveloped and unfound, hidden gem. Yeah. But that it was intellectual enough and curious enough for James to sort of want to sink his teeth into, while at the same time being such an awesome commercial story that obviously the film would go on to do what it did. I would be curious to understand the greenlighting process of working with the source material on the book, and then how that came about when you guys discovered that this was going to make sense to develop, and then what that relationship was like working with Tommy Wiseau. Okay,
yeah. James, a friend, so James was shooting the interview up he was shooting the interview up in Vancouver when a friend of his called him and said, I just read this book called The Disaster Artist. I feel like it's right up your alley. You should just give it a read. James read it that night, and the next day was like, I have to do this. He told me about it. I had never even heard of The Room, even though I had seen these posters years ago. Tommy Wiseau had these posters up on Highland Boulevard, Highland Avenue, for years, just with his picture up there and something called The Room. I'd seen it 1,000 times, but just didn't know what it was. And I'd never seen The Room. So I read the book and I was like, oh my God, I've got to see this movie. And anyhow, I went to see it and blown away. And just the book was funny, heartfelt, and just about a guy trying to fulfill his dreams, and which James had been trying to do for a very long, had been doing for a very long time. But so James was working with Seth, and Seth read the book. Seth already loved The Room. Seth was on board almost right away. So what we did, so the first thing was I had to go off, and before we got into any creative, I had to go off and basically get the rights from Tommy, from Greg Sestero, who wrote the book, but also we needed the life rights of Tommy. So I remember, I think the first conversation that we had with Tommy was James and me, Tommy's agent, and Greg all on the line, and James is sort of explaining his vision, and Tommy says, well, who's going to play me? I already knew James wanted to play him. James hadn't said anything to him, and James was like, or Tommy said, I really want Johnny Depp to play this role. And James started laughing. He's like, I don't know if we can get Johnny Depp or anything. But finally, Greg steps in and goes, well, James, why don't you play it? And then I say, yeah, James, you should play it. And Tommy said, well, okay. I've seen some of your movies. Some are good, some are bad. But so that went on. So that whole process went on for about 6 months, getting the rights, because we couldn't do anything creative until we got the rights. And Tommy, if anyone knows anything about Tommy, he's very peculiar, and he would not, there was one sticking point in the deal, and that was that he demanded that we write a scene in the movie that could not be cut between him as Tommy Wiseau and James playing Tommy Wiseau. He's like, this scene has to be in the movie. Otherwise, I'm not giving you the rights. So finally, we were just like, okay, fine, we'll agree to this. We don't know how we're going to do it yet, but we'll just agree to it. So that took about 6 months to to navigate. Finally, when we did that, we brought on Newstetter and Weber, who are these amazing script screenwriters that did like 500 Days of Summer and a few other things. And, they're going to cost a lot of money. So we want to develop this the right way. It's one of the first movies that James and I did where it's actually developed the correct way, which is you get the rights, you find the writers that you want, you go to a financier to help pay for those writers. So this is where we're at this point. Normally before this, it was James saying what material he wanted to do, what movie he wanted to do, having someone write the script for free, then me going off and getting the rights, and then us, rushing into production. And yeah, so this is the time we don't do that. So we asked Newstetter and Weber, they're totally into it. And Seth's company has a deal with Good Universe. So they're a financing and production company. We went to Erin Westerman there, who's an amazing producer. And she loved it, and they paid for the development. And so we paid Newstetter and Weber to write the script. And that took about 9 months to get finished to where we wanted it. Once the script was ready, then we had James directing. We had James playing the lead. We asked his brother Dave to play Greg Sestero. So we had our package ready to go out and start pitching. And that's actually the first time I remember thinking, this is probably the best way to produce movies, is to get your package together before going out to financiers.
Go figure.
Exactly. Seriously, it's like, what good are you as a producer if you can't, what are you bringing to the table? You have to lead with your best foot when you go to these financiers and the studios and networks. Yep. So,
love it. And so now you're out and you're making the rounds, and you've got Good Universe backing it at that point, as I'm assuming they were a full partner with you guys in taking it out and shopping. Where did you go? What was that process like? Were people jumping on it immediately, or was it a book with many chapters?
Yeah, it was a book with many chapters, because at that time, it's James's first studio movie as a director. He did not have a good track record as a director in regards to making money and having successful films, only because it was his, I believe it was his choice. He's doing a lot of, like we said, niche material before then. So a lot of studios were not into the James Franco experience as a director, at least. And this needed to be a studio movie. But Seth, being again, a huge actor and a huge producer at the time, I think basically with him on board, and I can't remember what exactly happened. They had to guarantee that Seth would be there if James sort of went down some rabbit hole, and that Seth would sort of keep him in line, basically.
Right.
So what we did is when he took the package out, James, of course, was shooting something in Canada. He was shooting 11/22/63, this Hulu miniseries. So we had to do all of the pitching by Zoom, which is now everyone does Zoom. It's like that might be the thing of the future, Zoom.
Right.
Zoom pitches. But at that point, it was the first time I'd ever used Zoom. We're like, okay. But so we Zoomed. We went to all of them. We went to, all the studios, Sony, Amazon, Netflix, Universal, New Line, A24, everyone. And, we didn't get a lot of interest. It was crazy. It was like this great package. Everyone loves The Room. Or not. So let me back up a little. We didn't get a lot of interest. However, if you know anything about the movie The Room, there are fanatics out there that love this movie. It's widely regarded as the worst movie ever made. And it's an experience when you watch it in the movie theater. It's an experience like the Rocky Horror Picture Show. It's a lot of audience involvement and everything. So there are some fanatics. Thankfully, there were fanatics over at New Line in this guy Mike Mike Disco and his partner Dave Neutstetter, who ironically had taken Davey Franco to a screening of The Room years before.
Wow.
These guys were in our corner right from the beginning. And so we didn't get a lot of offer. I think we got maybe one other offer. I think it was actually from A24, which comes into play later again. But New Line, the synergy was there, so we went with them.
And so what does that look like, Vince? So you've taken it out, and even a package as solid as this, and a film that ended up being as strong of a finished piece of content as this, and ultimately what I would say is a hit by almost every measure, it was still met with some resistance during that process. So now you've got a couple of offers in hand. What does that look like to go to the next step from the offer has sort of been negotiated to a certain point, and you guys are now going to take it towards production? Are there other players that come into the mix to actually get it into production and then bring it all back with how A24 comes back into the mix and ultimately does a great job, like they always do, with sort of recognizing this fresh marketing take that they seem to be able to pull off with their projects? Right.
Once we get the offers, it's easy to know. We basically went with New Line because the synergy was there. We could tell they were all on board, and probably the biggest factor was they're offering the most money.
Yeah.
My production company and Seth's production company, the guy that runs his company is a guy named James Weaver, who's also extremely smart and just knows his shit. We're ready to shoot this thing. We have the budget. We know where we're shooting. We know all of this as we're going into these meetings. So in our minds, we're shooting in a couple months, no matter what, which we had to anyways, because that's the window of time we had with Seth and James. So we were all ready to go. So once someone greenlights us, the process was, let's just start pre-production. And between James Weaver and me, we both know how to make movies physically. So the two of us basically just went right into pre-production almost. And so there's really no one else coming in at that point. We already know what we're doing, and we just go and do it, thankfully. So we shoot in LA. It's like a 5-week shoot, and we shoot in December and January, and we take a 2-week break, for Christmas.
Yep.
So we end up shooting, and everyone can tell, on set, it's like James is in the Tommy character the entire time. He's in the Tommy getup. He's directing in the Tommy character. People are coming to set and asking where James is, and Seth would point that guy over there. So James is being pretty method at this point. And by the way, he worked very hard on that part. He went for days and days and days. Greg Sestero had given James all these tapes of Tommy talking, and James would listen to him and just talk in the Tommy voice the whole time. And which harken back to when James did the TV movie James Dean, where he played James Dean, where he basically, in order to get into that character, James, for 4 months, basically went missing. He was, he wanted to feel the loneliness of the loneliness that he needed, that he needed for the character. So he went complete method. Anyhow, so we shot for 5 or 6 weeks, cut the movie together, realized that it wasn't quite coming together. And this is the advantage that these studio movies have over independents, is that I've never had the chance to actually go in and reshoot something. This is like, you have your finished version, and you're like, oh, wait, and this part could use a little more heart. Let's rewrite that section and reshoot it. And then when you have two great screenwriters like Neustadter and Weber, it's like, it's a great experience when you have this. So actually a year later, it took us a year to actually reshoot. So
wow.
A year later, the same night that we started principal production, a year later, we did 4 days of reshoots. So that brought the movie together. We cut that sections in. All of a sudden, it's all making sense. Basically, the ending worked a lot better. We reshot the ending, and again, it just had more heart.
It's great. It's great.
Yeah. So we show the final product to Warner Brothers, who's the parent company of New Line. They're the ones responsible for the marketing that's going to have to happen, and and God love them, they were all great people. So there was never any animosity or anything. It's just they saw the film, and I believe they just didn't know how to market it. They started sending us trailers that really emphasized just how bad the movie was, and that was it. When our whole point was, it's not just this is a love letter to The Room. It's a love letter to two guys trying to, accessing the American dream, which is,
right.
You know what I mean? So anyhow, we're looking at the trailers. We're thinking this is not working. And again, this is when you have someone like Seth Rogen in your corner, no one is going to argue with him. So I recall it coming down to a point where Warner Brothers was going to do one of two things. They were going to just offload it to Netflix at a time for a price that was way above the budget that we had. So everyone was going to make a little bit of money. And but it would have gone to Netflix. And this movie needs to be a movie that's in a theater, because The Room is in the theater, and it's such an experience in the theater. So in that conversation, basically Seth is talking to Toby Emmerich, and Seth basically says, no, we are not offloading this to Netflix. This is not why. None of us made this movie to go out and make just a little bit of money. We made this movie because it's a love letter. And at that point, someone had the idea of giving it to A24, who is very experienced with these types of movies.
Yep.
And James and I knew David Finkel very well from our times at Spring Breaker. David, who runs A24, bought a movie of ours back in 2009 called Saturday Night, this documentary on it, one episode of Saturday Night Live. And then he also bought Spring Breakers. So we knew him pretty well. And David worked it out with Warner Brothers. They worked out I don't know what the financial details were, but they worked it out, and Warner Brothers gave it to A24 to promote and distribute, which may be the first time in the history of Hollywood that's ever happened. I don't know. At least amicably.
Amicably. When did you know? So now it's out, and you have the deal with A24. When did you guys know that you were seeing all these earlier versions and some of the marketing concerns that your previous partners had? When did you realize this thing's going to have legs? And then when did you realize this thing's going to be a potential hit? And this is different than what Rabbit Bandini had done before. Yeah.
So the very first time we realized it was going to be a hit was at South by Southwest, which is a film festival in Austin. It was our first screening. It was the premiere. It was a sneak screening, we called it, because we weren't quite finished with it. And I've probably gone to 500 premieres in my life, or thousands of screenings.
Yeah.
This screening was the most amazing experience I've ever been through in my life as a filmmaker. And because, well, first off, it's a room full of people that love The Room. It's a room full of people that love film. And we played the movie, and you could not hear half of the movie because so many people were laughing and like yelling at the screen, and it was just riotous. And the next day, as James and I were flying back to LA, the reviews start coming in from that screening, and I'm sitting there reading them to James as we're on, sitting on the plane, and I'm just like, dude, this is this is the best reviews I've ever read for anything that we've ever done, much less anything that, I've seen that year. So I think at that point, that was the first thing. And then the second thing was when A24 came to us with their plan, their marketing plan, which was just genius. I mean, it revolved around them renting that a little billboard on Highland where Tommy used to have his billboard years earlier, with a phone number on there that people could call. And James, that the phone would be going directly to James, and James would answer it as Tommy himself. And so this was promoted, and it's like, it's such a great idea. And so once that idea came out, we're like, they're on the right page. They're the ones. They're definitely the ones.
It's excellent. I want to come back to A24 and the marketing component, but I want to close on the room with, you have that amazing sequence at the exit or the end title or the end credits of the film, where you have on one side of the screen the original room, and then you have the disaster artist footage on the other side, showing how closely mirrored you guys were able to achieve during production. Was that always planned out? Was it something that was obviously so fine-tuned, detailed during production that you knew you were going to do this side by side? And I guess I'm curious what the playback process was like on set to be that meticulous.
Yeah, no, it was not. We did not know we were going to do that. Although, the way that James and Seth and Brandon Trost, who was the cinematographer, the way that they approached it was that they wanted, first, they knew that the room fans were going to know if anything was different. So they wanted to be as precise as possible in all the choreography, what the set looked like. So before each take, James would have this mini, phone. It was a phone or something that everyone would watch the scene like 3 or 4 times. And then so they get the choreography down and just do the exact same thing. I mean, they would do 5 or 6 takes until they actually got it right. So if there is a scene that we're shooting that's actually in the room, they designed it so it would be exactly the same. So I think it was actually a note from Mike Disco or Dave Newstead or someone over at New Line that said, you guys, you should really play them side by side at the end, because I think it was Mike and Dave, because they're such Room fans, that they're like, it would be such a fun thing to see how close you guys got it.
You're right.
And so in one of our test screenings, we did that, and it brought the test screening house down. I mean, They just loved it. So, actually, the test screening actually brings up, I forgot to add that in there. That was another reason why Warner Brothers thought they may not be able to market it, because we scored like a 70 or something.
Which is still pretty high. It's not horrible.
Yeah. Which remind me to tell you another, the worst test screening experience I ever had. But 70, yeah, it's pretty high. And I think we ended up over 3 test screenings getting a 74 or something. But that's, for Warner Brothers, it's like, again, it just hits this middle point where they just didn't quite know what to do.
I want to go back onto A24. And you guys had worked with them, like you said. Spring Breakers is a great example of just totally brilliant marketing, and really changed, I think, the way people thought about marketing movies. I mean, I was super young and we were starting our companies at that time. And I remember looking at them and thinking, this is just a totally new era of the way people are thinking about immersive and experiential marketing, and recognizing that digital is way more important than buying TV ad space. And with The Room, and even using Spring Breakers as well as part of the backdrop for your answer, how much do you think working with companies like that has made you sort of look and reflect at how much the business has changed over your times of being in the business with James and being partners over the years of Rabbit Bandini? And like you said, there have been a number of projects that were rushed through development and they suffered because of that.
Yeah.
But even those projects probably couldn't be saved by brilliant marketing, right? The material and the project still has to support itself. But then a great project, we all know, a great project without a great back end of a distributor and a marketing strategy and people that have that fresh take, that'll also sort of fall on deaf ears without an audience. Does it make you, when you think about A24 and Neon and companies like this that are pushing truly the boundaries of, I think, the next generation of what it's going to take to get audiences really excited about original storytelling, especially in the era of streaming and Marvel tentpoles, how much had changed, how much of that was different from some of the experiences you guys had on the myriad of other titles you were working on over the years at Rabbit Bandini that didn't reach that kind of audience, that didn't have that kind of marketing impact?
Yeah, well, a good example is the difference between, like, let's say, because we did Spring Breakers and this other very niche movie, this William Faulkner adaptation called As I Lay Dying, around the same time. So even though Spring Breakers was a much more, poppy, energetic film, the way that A24 approached the marketing and the way that our financier on As I Lay Dying approached the marketing was completely different. Because A24 knew that these small films, in order for them to work, you just don't have the money for marketing. I mean, some of the marketing budgets at studio films are bigger than the budgets of the actual movies. Right. And it's like, there's got to be a different way. So David Finkel, A24, obviously knows this and hires people at his company that are just outside the box thinkers. And, like even from the very first meeting that we had, David was like, well, this is all going to be digital. James, I have some ideas that you can do. We can just upload them online. Here's a couple grand for you to go do it. And it was like fun. It was all, it felt like they understood the movie and the marketing ideas. The ideas were from the movie. It's like not some stupid idea. All of it online. And conversely, and then it being online, these are the types of movies that people who are online a lot will see and can build the word of mouth can build from being online, because those are the type of people that are actually watching them. As I Lay Dying, on the other hand, our financier wouldn't do any marketing because he didn't have the money for marketing. But had he employed this digital mindset, we could have found the people that are sort of highbrow, or that, the type of literary type people that might like a Faulkner movie.
Right.
So, that someone like, if As I Lay Dying was a studio piece, they would have spent $50 million and just the broadest marketing campaign to get to every corner of America through TV and movie ads. But I don't know if I'm explaining that correctly.
No, you are perfectly. You are perfectly. I want to just circle back. You made a comment about, let me tell you about the worst test screening experience you guys ever had.
Oh.
So I think the first is, I'd love to just have you explain. For again, it's a lot of inside baseball. So for those that aren't super under the hood, the test screening process, obviously a lot of independent films don't have them. A lot of them are sort of on these rush post-production schedules, just get the thing delivered. For you guys, and certainly for a lot of the studio stuff you guys have done, that process is very normal. Explain that process, and then whatever story or stories you're willing to share on that, and how that sort of informs the end result of what ends up reaching the audience.
Definitely, yeah. I actually love test screenings. It's an opportunity for the filmmakers to get unbiased opinions in the post-production process. Meaning, as you're still editing the movie, you can get some feedback. But the screening process is a very costly process. So, which is why mostly only studio movies can do that, because it'll cost. There are companies in LA that do that only do this. They recruit people around LA that would be the type of people that watch this particular movie. So that in of itself takes a lot of time. And they will rent out a movie theater at AMC and pack it with about 300 people. The movie plays. The filmmakers are in the way back just watching and gauging people's reactions. And at the end of the film, the entire audience fills out a questionnaire, and about 15, 20 questions. And then after that, about 20 people stick around for a focus group where a moderator gets up and just asks them all these questions. So this is very helpful. The testing, and then 20 minutes after that, the moderator will come back out to the filmmakers, and he will have tallied all the scores. And we're all sitting there waiting, just like on pins and needles, because there are specifics. Based on what this score is, the studio is going to either promote your movie very much, they're either going to dump your movie, or they're going to throw more money into marketing or more money into reshoots. So many things can happen based on this score. And the score is taken from, there are 2 questions at the top of a scoring sheet. The first one is, would you recommend this movie for a friend? Yes or no? And the other one is, was this movie excellent, very good, fair, or poor? Mm-hmm. So they take those 2 questions, and that's how they tally the score. The best score I ever heard was someone got like a 95% positive score. I think it was one of Seth's movies. I forget which one. But, somewhere in the 65 to 80 range is pretty good. Yeah. Although you want to get as high as possible. 70 to 80, I guess, is around average. Right? Wouldn't you say? Somewhere in there? Yeah. So with Disaster Artist, the first score we got was 68. And for us, we were like, because that really just confirmed that there were we wanted it to be more than that, because at that point in time, we hadn't gone to A24 yet, and we were trying to figure out this marketing situation at Warner Brothers. So it didn't help that there were a lot of questions revolving around it. But after our reshoots, we retested and got in, I think, in the 80s. I did another movie years prior to that, that, a movie that bombs, their test scores can be 40, 45. A movie that's critically lambasted, 35, 40, somewhere in there, maybe a 50. A movie that I did in 2015 scored an 11.
What happened? What happened to the film? So how does that film get released? What does the life of that film look like? Yeah. The 11.
The 11 didn't get released. Thankfully, our financier just basically was like, I can't. There's nothing we can do with this. Which by the way, was the guy. This guy was an awesome guy. This financier, he just understood that he was just going to eat the cost, and we'll figure out something on the next one. That's the financier you want to work with. And some of these independent financiers are just devils.
Yeah. No, it's a tough business. There's no doubt about it. Well, I don't know. I've got a handful of rapid fire questions for you, and I know we're sort of coming up on time here. Yeah. Curious what you guys are working on now. If we weren't all quarantined, what would you be going down the chute with, trying to get towards a production green light at the moment?
Yeah, at the moment, really, it's funny. Like, we've been so focused on TV, and we have 2 movies coming out that are supposed to come. We were supposed to come out this summer, which is The Rental and Zola. But so we're focused on those, how those are going to be released, and we're focused on 4 or 5 TV shows that are right at the precipice of getting greenlit. And one of them that's already been series greenlit trying to just figure out what we're going to do in this in this process. So with the COVID process. So that's really what we're focused on now.
Got it. So it sounds like a lot more television right now than film.
For now. I mean, we have a lot of long lead development projects in the film world. So they're just not ready to go out. Like I said, with us, our thing is we want to package it as thoroughly as possible before sending it out. So our motto is we spend a lot of time in development, getting the package perfect before we send it out.
So it seems like Disaster Artist just changed the dynamic and the way you guys think about the process all the way through.
100%. Yes. Yeah.
What do you think the biggest misnomer or biggest piece of advice you sort of give to people that are either emerging in this business or actively working in the business, but bumping up against a lot of roadblocks, or thinking about getting into the business, that you think, even if it's something you learned personally, something that you've sort of learned over the many years you've been working, or something that's relatively new and that you've experienced now post the Disaster Artist that you would sort of impart on people?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is, if you're already somewhat of an established producer, I think one of the biggest mistakes that people make, and I've made this mistake a ton of times, is that they want to take it to the studio network financier just too early in the process. As a producer, you want the most leverage you can possibly have at that level. And you're not going to have much leverage if you just go with the story. But if you go in with a writer, an actor already attached, a director already attached, you have so much more ability to dictate your future. And I hear it all the time now, people saying, I've got this great idea. I want to go right to Hulu. I want to go right to Amazon, which, look, things get made so many different ways. That's totally fine. But why not get some attachments first before going in?
Right.
I think for the more established producer, that's the biggest thing I could impart. For someone trying to get into producing or directing or just the filmmaking business, I mean, nowadays, I just think there's so many ways to get things made. You can go out for $100, for $10, and just go shoot something.
Right.
Put it on YouTube, start a YouTube channel. It's like, you just have to do it. Now, it's really just getting out of your head, figuring out what speaks to you, and just going and shooting it. It doesn't have to be a movie. Maybe it's a short film. Maybe it's a little podcast, but like a little short series or something. I don't know, just something. Sure. Shoot it. Just do it. You
right.
have the resources to do it, the tenacity to follow through. Just go do it.
Love it. And I think the last thing is, in this sort of great this great sort of rear view mirror view you now have of the career you've built and the filmography you've built, a project aside from Spring Breakers, aside from Disaster Artists, aside from As They Lay Dying, something you look at, you're super proud of, and the process and the people, it just clicked. And that moment where a project comes together, and whether it had a huge, massive impact with an audience or whether it didn't, but you guys were super proud of it, and you look at it as something you were proud to sort of plant the flag into.
I mean, I think, honestly, the two movies we have coming out this summer, Zola and The Rental, were just two tremendous examples of just everything coming together. Zola started off as James it started out as a disaster. We had James directing, we had 2 white screenwriters, we had 4 white producers about a young black woman. And it's not like, okay, fine, we can do that, but there's got to be a better way to do it. We found this hot young director, Janixa Bravo, who had just come off this movie called Lemon at Sundance, and she recommended this hot young playwright that was going to Yale to help rewrite the script. This guy named Jeremy O. Harris, who's now, the talk of Broadway, but he came in and rewrote the script. And everything sort of just worked out perfectly. And, James was fine just producing. We brought in A24 to finance and distribute. We have a up and coming, amazing, talented director. We have a distributor that will allow us to cast it how we want. So we were able to find this woman, Taylor, who plays Zola, who will be a huge star. So there's that. And then The Rental, which is a movie that Dave Franco directed, basically was a passion project of his that in his directorial debut, we happened to find great financiers that just work very well with the first-time director. And a lot, they were just very easy to work with. So I feel like those two projects came together and just, again, we're firing on all cylinders.
It's exciting. Well, look, yeah. I appreciate you carving out the time. It's always awesome to catch up. You guys have made so many things I love, and love working with you guys when we do, and hope to connect on the other side of this COVID tunnel and find more.
I hope so too, Matt. Have a good one.
Thanks, Vince. I really appreciate it, man.
Yep. Talk to you later.
Talk soon. Bye. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Greenlit, the Buffalo 8 podcast. For financing questions, feel free to contact us at Bondit Media Capital at info@bondit.us. For production, development, and distribution questions, feel free to contact us at Buffalo 8, info@buffalo8.com. We'd love to hear from you and hope you'll continue listening to the podcast episodes ahead.